Hey guys, so this topic was calling to me lately. Now that everyone seems to be so caught up in what is value, what is status, what is good, what is right, what is just. And we really should make a fundamental distinction between status and strength, of course, taken abstractly, and power. And certainly we can make the claim that there could be an overlap, and usually there may be, but they could also diametrically oppose each other. And often so, self-justifying. So wherever people are, people say that it's good to be there and it is right to be there, and those who are not there are wrong. Or essentially say things to, technically, I'm using the correct word, to control and manipulate others, right? That is the function it serves. So strength and power would be different. It would be just proven. Yet, we should take one step back and look at the nature of status. It is entirely given to you by others. It is opinion. And not only opinion, but also subjective. And this is most prevalent if you look at it through the lens of history. And what was status did vary. And what is status, based on various countries and cultures, does vary. There are some common factors, but we can even strictly make the claim that what is good is status, although that is generally how it is used. That whatever is useful to me by others, so I'm going to think higher of you, let's say that, because you are conducting yourself in a way that is useful to me. So that is essentially what status is, but not necessarily useful, but it is my preference. It could be just completely arbitrary. So I impose a bunch of arbitrary nonsense on you. We might call it tradition. And as long as you obey me, as long as you conform, then you are bestowed certain level of status. Now keep in mind, this act can itself aim to make you weaker and obviously more obedient. And in fact, your parents might teach you that it is good to obey your elders. Well, that is extremely convenient for you, but if you just like obeying that much, then you will obey me, right? It's like, if you like something one way, you should like it the other way too, right? So status definitely has a strong element of control. And others say that, be this and then you have status, or you do that and you have status, believe that and then you have status. It's like, and you cannot be the guy who says like, I don't care. That is the biggest crime. You can fight it, you can scream, you can disagree, you can whatever. You do not get to not care. And here I'm deliberately trying to not use very specific examples because they might distract from the topic. I know we might conclude that very specific examples could be a good portrayal, but they can also make you feel a certain things, and then you immediately jump into the camp of right and wrong, right? So if I told you, like, what is right, A or B, then you're given no information. But if I start giving you information, then you say like, oh, I feel like A is the right answer, right? But in a normal case, it is just your feelings. It is just the arbitrary letter you're feeling toward. And in this case, you would say that, the letter that you like, A, is status. But if I use a specific example, then you might feel toward one specific outcome. And it really does not really matter how does this manifest, because you might have two people. One feels toward A, other feels toward B. Which one of them is right? Or you have three people, one feels toward A, the other B, another C. It's like, which one of them is right? But if you bring another guy and they happen to feel toward A, then A outnumbers everyone. I guess that would be right. I guess by the rule of the mob. Yet that would not be the conclusion. The ultimate conclusion would be that it is all subjective. And those who try to impose themselves as a status, as some kind of authority over you, no doubt claiming somewhat of a status, then you can not like it, but you don't get to not care. And in fact, if you even look at it from the lens of someone you might think that they have a power, right? Real power. Let's just say, still somewhat in the spirit of trying to not go too specific here. Let's just say a lord. Do they have power? Do they have power at all? Because they have land, property, right? but that is kind of bestowed upon them by the king, or at least protected by the king, so they don't have property. They don't. Do they have the title? Well, it's kind of like it's bestowed upon them, but they don't have the title. They have it as long as others agree and play along with the game. But of course, if you're a lord, you might think of other things that could be status. You might think that doing nothing all day is status, right? Now, I'm not saying that whether that is status or not. I'm just saying that you most likely would say that because that is something you do a lot. Or you might say that knowing Latin is status, right? Because you know Latin, the plebs don't know Latin, and you clearly spent your time very valuably, which clearly shows that you're superior. And that is, in fact, how people like to measure themselves. So they kind of have their own stick inside their own head, and then that is the stick that they might use on others. So someone who possibly knows a lot of languages might pride themselves on knowing a lot of languages, like, this is good, I speak 6 languages. Now they might personally realize that others might not value this as much, but they still would kind of wish they did, because they possibly they would not admit to it, learned it almost every single time so that others care, and others give them status for it. And here I'm really just considering the status element of it. You can argue that there could be a power element to it too. So let's suppose that you don't care that I'm speaking English. Still, this would be an advantage to me. Even if no one would care, suppose, it certainly still would be an advantage. But suppose I knew a language that is kind of useless, then it's kind of hard to argue that it's giving me status or power. Yet I want to further emphasize the largely arbitrary aspect of status. So if you have nothing, you might say that, not having anything is status. I don't need anything. That's why I don't have it. Now, this is a complex topic. I'm just saying that the self-justifying aspect is pretty dang strong. And if we just looked at humans like some kind of calculating machines, I think that would be too generous, because people do a bunch of dumb things that doesn't make too much sense. But it does make sense in the context that if you behave yourself in a way that others possibly value you for, then your circumstances does improve. But oftentimes, this status might be something that is actually hurting you. Because, for example, obedience would be one of the primary source of status, and also validation. Now, this might seem pretty arbitrary there. Validation? How does that fit in? Well, everything is really underpinned by validation. I guess we can call it antisocial too, the other side of it. But if you do not care, then this whole status game just falls apart. Now, that is not to argue that you are not doing things to improve your situation, but you're not acting in a way others are looking to control you based on. One arena that I would mention as pretty damn strong in the status game, and you might not think of it, would be social media. Everyone is just shouting into the void. Especially this is true of those who otherwise feel somewhat helpless of what is status, what is right, what is good, what is just, and whatever, right? Now keep in mind, going back to the previous example of the A and B, is my A and B as good as your A and B, or is your A and B is the correct A and B? And an interesting question I would ask is that, is status your best interest? Very interesting question. Because I'm not disregarding that it's positive, and you should get it if it's in your way, but largely we can argue that status is kind of a false god, and others are like, do what I want, and then I'll think possibly highly of you. So if we took it to the max, then if this is false god, then this would be being God. And self-evidently, strength and power would be something that is not opinion-based. It is just true, even if not a single person agrees, not even you. And you can easily have this experience yourself that, let's say that, of course, we don't know every single person on the planet, but say that you don't know, you don't think that you can do a thing, and then you try to do it, and then you can. So in this case, we can easily argue that you either had the strength or you had the capacity to have the strength, and that's it. Although, from the perspective of status might even claim that, trying that thing in itself is already a loss of status. In fact, we do see this, that failure and mistake is a loss of status. How insane is that? Because when it comes to doing things, you can just do it and get better over time. Yet that rarely exists in the status realm. It's all about losing face. Because I'm not going to use power here, but let's say advantage that is conferred onto you by others is extremely fragile. Like, let's suppose you're the king. Now, what power you actually have, what you really do have. Like, let's suppose they all did not care. Not a single person. Then you would have nothing. No one would think that you're a king. So essentially, it would just come down to you being dumped on a remote island alone. What kind of king would you be there? What kind of power you have? And at that point, you might say that, the king might have some okay education and possibly well-fed. That's it. So essentially, that would be their power, but their status is largely different from that. Now, probably the healthiest manifestation would be that you have something that is useful for you, or rather, this is something that others value you based on. But this might not be the case, because you can be the guy in school, for example, who studies, and then what you gonna get? Are you gonna be cheered as a hero, or are you just gonna end up in the locker? So they might make the claim that is not status. Yet, in this peculiar case, it's kind of hard to argue, because let's even suppose that person in question is not even insufficient in other areas, simply that they are shining in an area that others might be uncomfortable with. So while strength would be advantage regardless of opinion, status would be advantage entirely based on opinion. But strength can be a little bit subjective too. Like, suppose that I get really buff, right? I can lift a lot. And let's say that this might give you status, but also you might argue that this gives you strength, but possibly strength in only one area. So suppose you hit the gym a lot. Can you really make the argument that this really powered you up for life? I mean, certainly you can argue that this is positive, but not like everyone who visits the gym is a billionaire. So the point I'm getting to is that it tends to be somewhat local, at least when we are talking about status here. So in the realm of status, you could easily have status in a group, and that is the easiest way to have status. Possibly the easiest example of it would be that you play a game, and in that game, possibly being good at that game is respected, but no one else cares. And don't think that I'm talking about just video games here, but everything out there is a game. You could go into a group, and in fact, you see that people might have certain views, and then they go into a certain group that not only validate this view, but they give esteem based on it. And this group goes around also advertising itself that, this is the right thing to believe, and this is the thing we give this is the thing that we give status for, so why not just sign up? So status tends to be pretty concerned with what you should do and what you should be. Now, I'm not disregarding this, because you might point out positive manifestations of status. So you can argue that status promotes pro-social behavior. Maybe. But that would be a somewhat of a naive way of looking at it. In fact, probably the most correct way to say it is that whatever wins is status. And we do see this a lot in our society, that as long as you have the money, then you have no shortage of friends. Yet, to circle back to strength here, because I was using the gym example as some kind of a local example, but I would make a distinction here that is it just something that you do? Like, let's say that you go to the gym and you lift there, and does it have some kind of utility? Is it, or possibly better analyzed as, is it like a priority to be buff. Because let's suppose that you're doing some kind of sports and you're getting paid, then obviously we can argue that this is a strength of the individual or some kind of power, whatever. But for many, this might not be relevant. This could be only relevant to go to the gym next time. And yeah, going to the gym is okay, but you don't have to be buff. But why am I saying all this? It's because it would be very easy to slip into the camp of I do it so it's status, or I believe it so it's status, while actual gain is in doubt. So you can argue that the fitness is a proven advantage, and possibly being strong is a slight proven advantage, but everything else is kind of a status play. And arguably that could be the main aspect of it. While on the other side we can ask the question, which could be quite telling, is what would you do if no one cares, or would even hate you for it? And hate is a pretty strong word, but it is also quite insightful in this context. Because if your gut feeling and immediate retort would be that I wouldn't do it if others would hate me for it, then that would naturally bring up the question of why are you even doing it? And it would be not for personal reasons mostly. I realize that it's a bit of a generalization, but it is very close to the truth if we are looking at it from the lens of best interest. It would be really hard to argue that status is anything but sabotage. And I suppose the opposite of that would be empowerment. Now, to clarify my point about status, it would be 100% in your interest that others respect status and you possibly have as much status as you can, but it would not be in your interest to chase status over power. So one possible type of status would be that you chase the approval, because that's what you do, of some group. And let's say that you even seemingly get it. But what is really your reward here, other than making yourself a slave to their approval? Because aren't you? You just joined the group, and now you have to do all you can. You just have to jump through all the hoops so they keep their positive feelings toward you. But the unfortunate reality is that it does not mean that you have the capacity and potential to gain much more power, I suppose. But still, it would be something that others can take away. And in the realm of status, you are kind of having, oftentimes, very dubious gains. And seeking status almost always includes self-sabotage. Now, it is possible that seeking that they perfectly overlap. Let's just go with that. But let me suppose they do. You're not doing it for you, but now you're doing it for validation. And in this point, we can see that whoever owns your validation owns you. And status really lives and dies by others' opinion. And this is just so common these days that someone just goes and shares their opinion. Like I fucking care. So, in that regard, everyone is your boss. And you gotta keep in mind that many of them, most of them, pretty much all of them, don't have your best interest at heart, but theirs. Or possibly they have some other agenda. So, you might have someone who beats their chest over like, oh yeah, be a strong boy or something, but is that what they truly, genuinely want from you? No, they kind of want you to obey them. That's it. Let's not even consider anything psychotic here. Are you really wishing for, let's say, some guy to come in and completely dump on your business? So at that point, you can wonder if these guys are honest. I guess we don't see inside their head, but essentially, they're not gonna give you status based on dominating them, but being subservient to them. And in fact, in many cases, and possibly this is a bit more touchy subject, others tend to give you status for being weak. And in fact, the weak might give themselves status for being weak, because people like to self-justify. And wherever you are is the good place to be, right? And that way, you can just be happy. That's a good philosophy. So others teach you to be weak, and the weak pride themselves for being weak. Now, you might say that this is not true at all. But isn't it? Look at any parent. They teach, first of all, their kid to obey them. Right? That would be like saying that, I want you to be strong, but not too strong that I can punch you into obedience. And in fact, you want to, I suppose, establish an identity that thrives on validation. And playing for power on the other side is quite different. You essentially go for whatever you deem to be your best interest. That does not mean that you don't opportunistically play for status, but ultimately you're not aiming for validation, partly because you know that what people are giving status for might be corrupted, but also can be entirely withdrawn. And this could be entirely no fault to your own, so perhaps AI is going to come in and takes your prestigious, high-status job, and then the next week you're just going to be a fucking loser everyone hates. That's what you get, the status. In fact, people quite hate power, right? Possibly they say to themselves that, this makes me a good person or whatever. And in fact, we have many phrases, many words that kind of exemplify this fact. Also, we have the word megalomania, wanting too much power. And in fact, if you look at pretty much all media we have, then those who just want power are automatically bad. Because that is kind of how humans interpret it in their mind. So, what is my point here? If you beat them, if you are better than them, then they most likely will hate you for it. They're not going to give you status. You're only getting status if you are doing what they want you to do. And you gotta keep in mind that they are also hypocrites. Because if they weren't, and our concept of good was actually more genuine, then people would not tell you to be good, for example, but they would be good to you. And I'm not claiming there aren't people like that, but there are a lot more people who just tell you to be good to them, even though they are not good to you. Or they just tell you that, what is status, what you should be doing for them, even though you know the deal. But even, let's suppose that you do something that is largely agreed upon that it's status, right? Let's say that a doctor, although I initially wanted to stay clearer away from specific examples, but let's say a doctor. How could you possibly dislike a doctor? Well, if they are healing the wrong people, I dislike them, right? That's how it works. Then you're getting no status. And in fact, even if you look at something that would be really hard to argue, that is not a positive of humanity, like growing food, do you get status for it? No, you're a dirty farmer. Even though those dirty farmers almost certainly doing much better than those in town, but I digress. The point is that it is just almost a futile game. Especially these days, you just go on social media and like, oh yeah, do that. That makes you a good person. Oh no, you should believe that. That makes you a good person. Oh no, you should be doing that. That makes you a good person, right? And this is just endless. And you might need to keep up with it. And possibly the best thing you can do on the regular is to shut the hell up. Truly. Because what you're gonna say, you're usually gonna say something that possibly information that others can use against you, or others gonna judge you based on. That's it. I mean, if you just looked at it, communication based on, I suppose, this criteria that we're outlining, then you should just say things about yourself that others will put you on a pedestal for, if you have the taste for it. Although, this kind of depends on the culture, because some like doing this. For others, you kind of come off as kind of weak. You should be probably hinting at perhaps not being a total idiot or something like that. But if you just go out there and say it, because some might do it, like possibly Asian cultures might be like, oh yeah, let's just spend the first minute of this first interaction, like just trying to establish my value here. Like, of course, I don't know. I just, something that came to my mind. So that could be a culture clash in a way. So one culture might consider that strong, other might consider that weak. Although they might both value what are listed, but the way it is presented is not valued. So in this particular context, not like coming on heavy makes you look weak, but also seeking someone else's validation, seeking someone else's opinion on you, like, oh yeah, look at me, I'm a very high status boy, kind of makes you look weak too. But also mainly not very approachable. By the way, power doesn't have to be about you, just something that actually fucking works, right? Not just perception. That is why it's so special, because for every one guy who has stuff, there are like 10,000 plus stalkers. And not only has, but like does stuff, I suppose. So while one guy is actually working, you would have the other guy is telling the third guy how cool they are and how much they work. And the third guy would be telling how much they work as well. Suppose that opposite of being slave to approval would be that I'm God. And I don't mean it in a way that you are someone who has a God complex, but you possibly realize the subjectivity of evaluations, like of like good and right and just and whatever. And if so, you might as well go with your own, or just not even care. Because we can say that these words are either your own justifications or the programming of others. And that is a really key element that I want to emphasize here, that this whole status game is also a control game. And it can easily manifest as that I'm gonna give you a big praise if you fetch for me, but if you ever think of being better than me, then I will fucking hate you for it. And most of all, this is the most important part, you must always acknowledge my status. And of course, the status I have is whatever I think in my head. Of course, if I thought that, then I would be a crazy person. That's why I'm trying to sell it to you, so you can manifest my delusion. And on the other side, there's really not much to say here, because you just go for what works. And that doesn't mean that you completely ignore other people. Of course, you can consider what is the best information, consider possibly experts, but there's not much point in caring about, like, especially mass opinions or those who want to lord over you. And most of all, this whole status game is a massive limitation. Yet, this is what tends to scare people, that, oh no, they have so much power. They don't have power, they have status. And they have as much power, and they have as much way to enforce their will as you are giving them. That's it. Actual power would be unrelated to opinion. As I said, even your opinion, because you can easily be a kind of person who were taught the proper way to think and the proper things to believe in, and now you have a bunch of limitations. But ultimately, and you can look at the universe of what seems to be possible and what seems to be not possible based on what we know, right? But who is to say what potentially can be done? Or the possibility that cavemen could have concluded that, what seems to be possible for them is all that can be possible at all. And that is incorrect. Now, this seems to be a massive picture view of trying to get to my point that you really can't trust what you believe and your own opinions. The only thing you can trust is that you try to do the thing and you keep doing the thing, and even then, you might not know if it would not work over time. In fact, in most cases, in almost all cases, if you can make progress at all, then it is only a question of time till something is done. So that is pretty much it. I largely consider the status games a loony bin, but of course you should opportunistically play them. And people are fickle and give status for whatever they want you to do. Except if that actually makes you weak, in which case you're not getting it anyway. Well, of course, they might change their mind. And of course, if you ever even remotely start to become a threat, they're probably not gonna like that. Then, of course, at that point, letting them win would be status. Be a good boy or something. But of course, if you actually did, then they would just think that you were dropped on the head while growing up, repeatedly. So, might as well do something that most likely will result in what you want, instead of just doing what others want and hoping they will like you for it.